We want to update you on, I know this will come as a big surprise, but the media has not exactly been covering the recount race in Minnesota very fairly. I know. It's really hard to believe, isn't it, that actually could be happening? Here's the headline you saw in a number of papers over the weekend. Minnesota Senate trial judges deliver blow to Coleman. But is that what happened? Let's ask his attorney, Ben Ginsberg, who joins us on our Newsmaker line this morning. Ben, how you doing?
Scott, I'm great, thanks.
Appreciate you joining us this morning, and most importantly, glad that you have signed on with the Coleman campaign here to stand up for this this travesty that has happened. It's just extraordinary to me that, it should not happen in the United States of America, and obviously we have some things to fix in reforms for voting, because what happened there has just been a travesty. So I'm glad you're part of the team, Ben.
Well, thank you, Scott. It's a great team to be a part of.
First of all, let's deal with the most recent news here of this ruling on Friday. Is it a blow to Coleman?
Not at all. The reality is that we'll have about 3,500 ballots still in play. Some of those will get winnowed out, but we'll have more than enough to overtake the Franken lead if that's the way the ballots go.
Why is it that this is being portrayed in the manner that it is in the media, that the rejected absentee ballots from 12 of 19 categories should not be counted in the Senate race, and that it'll make it tougher to undo the post-election night lead of that came later in the recount process for Franken?
Well, I think they can't help themselves from writing that story. But let's check on where we were. When this process started, the Franken campaign wanted to limit the universe to 650 votes. We had asked for about 4,800 in a summary judgment motion. The court said they would take a look at 4,800 of them. They then came up with their 12 of the 19 categories. The categories don't really fall into the categories that our ballots do. So the reality is we're at about 3,500 ballots still left in play. So that's a far cry from the 650 where Franken wanted to limit it. And you got to remember
that's extraordinary what you just said. So in other words, the Franken campaign wanted it limited to 650 of the absentee ballots counted. You guys go into court and say, no, it should be much larger than that, get it up to 4,800. The court pares that back from 4,800 to 3,500, but still, as you say, well above the 600 and some odd ones that really start. And the media portrays that as a loss to Coleman. Isn't that just vintage on how the media reports these things?
Yeah, I mean, some reported it more than others, but yeah, it really is. But the great Franken disenfranchising machine really is still in play here in Ramsey County, Minnesota.
Explain the Ramsey County boondoggle.
Well, Ramsey County is where Minnesota hears all these election cases, so that's where we find ourselves. It's interesting. 3 judges are trying to deal with an election that even in Minnesota is not really precise. We saw an extraordinary editorial in the St. Paul Pioneer Press that we're really not endorsing at all. But the editorial said that you can't really tell who won this election. Now we believe you can, and we believe that's Norm Coleman. But that one of the major newspapers, not a Coleman fan by any means, is saying something like that is pretty amazing.
Where are we at with the other issues? Of course, we talked obviously about the absentee ballots and what ought to be counted, what not. The most disturbing things here are the double counting, the inconsistent rulings, where some counties went ahead and counted and they counted those. It just seemed to me every step along the way that you had officials basically, if it favored Franken going that way, if it favored Coleman going against him, just one after another. But let's go down to the other points besides the absentee ballot issue of outstanding things to be resolved here.
Well, the duplicate original double counting issue is still very much alive. It'll come up in certain precincts that we'll get to as we go through the counties. Most of it happened in Hennepin County, which is Minneapolis, and so that's not where we're starting with our case. But those are still alive and very much on the table. The different standards from county to county is still very disturbing and very true. And indeed, I think you'll see that even in the court's order of last week trimming down the ballots, they ruled differently on some of those ballots, on some of those categories, than they have on specific ballots that they let in earlier. So we'll have something to say about that as the week progresses.
All right, what's the next big test for this particular case? Where are we going next?
Well, I think we're going to take another look at the court's order from Friday just to show those inconsistencies and to show the different standards with which similar ballots were treated. I mean, that's just as basic a constitutional violation as can be. I mean, why should my vote count but your vote not count, even although the out-of ballots look exactly the same?
So do we go point by point through these on the absentee ballots, on the double counting, on the standards, get them resolved, and then actually have a real count? Is that the plan?
Yep, it looks like the way the courts are doing it is they're dealing with the issues, dealing with the envelopes, and then they will summon a number of envelopes here to St. Paul and open them up and see who the votes are for.
And when do you anticipate that happening, Ben?
I can't anticipate that in a million years, Scott.
Just don't have any idea. I mean, we're talking weeks, we're talking months. How long are we talking?
I think we're talking weeks. But it's a process the parties in the court are trying to work through to streamline things some, and so we'll see where we end up with that. But it's a lengthy process to go through and look at individual ballots.
By the way, the Franken campaign, interestingly enough, had a little ploy recently where they said the stimulus bill was so important that they needed to, have this resolved so he could be seated. And interestingly enough, they didn't need his vote. Sadly, it still passed. But
well, I was able to go out that day and say today is the day the Democrats proved they could spend trillions without Al Franken.
It'd only get worse if you get the guy in there, obviously. But any more movement on the part of Schumer and company or Harry Reid to seat him early or pull any shenanigans there? Where are we at on that front?
No, that's kind of been a canary in the mine shaft moment for us. Harry Reid said last week that he wasn't going to try and seat Al Franken until the contest was over, and so they seem to have realized that they really just can't do that now.
All right, how's Norm doing?
Norm's doing great. He's here in the courtroom with us 2-3 times a week. He's an old trial lawyer, a real experienced litigator, and he's very helpful to have in court and offering strategy.
Last question for you, Ben. What needs to be fixed here? This is really Norm Coleman shouldn't be going through this, given what's happened here. What does this process tell you about what needs to be reformed?
The scary thing is that American elections are not calibrated to elections this close. And so what you see when you go through this, we encourage a volunteer system. We want people volunteering in the polls. We want different counties making their own decisions. And so when that happens, you're going to have different sets of eyes looking at the same rules and the same ballots and making different calls. And so we, I think, need a system that takes into account that when you get real narrow elections, you don't always know who won them. And that's a scary thing. It's what we saw to an extent in Florida, and we're seeing it here, and you see it every couple of election cycles.
By the way, Al Carlson's gotten beat up a little bit by the media about this issue in the North Dakota legislature by dealing with it. I think giving North Dakota and its neighboring status to Minnesota is perfectly appropriate to say, let's make sure this doesn't happen here. I'm glad that they did it, and I hope they continue to do it, and it ought to be done state by state to fix this. This is a mess. Ben, glad you're there. Good luck, and we'll keep folks posted. Just wanted to make sure they knew not to pay any attention to the headlines and the spin about this most recent ruling, and you helped us do that today, so thanks a bunch.
We're doing great. Thank you, Scott.
Good to talk to you. Ben Ginsberg, well-known Republican attorney, been there in those battles before, and not the least of which was, of course, 2000 in Florida. So very good news that he's there, part of the Coleman team.